lonely rancher found a young Apache girl hanging upside down on a cactus next to a sign that read, "White man shows no mercy." In the relentless summer of 1878, the desert sprawled like a cracked parchment under a sun that scorched without mercy, its heat rising in trembling waves from the parched earth, where the wind, whispering through dead mesquite leaves like secrets too heavy to keep, carried the faint scent of sage and distant smoke. Caleb's mare, Sage, snorted softly, her hooves kicking up dust that clung to his faded denim shirt as he checked the fence line, a ritual performed 362 days a year since the tragedy. The wind, whining low like a ghost mourning its name, brushed through the sagebrush, stirring a faint sound, a whimper, weak and sharp, like a thread about to snap. His heart slowed, a heavy thud against his ribs, and he froze, head tilting like a hawk sensing prey. Tying Sage to a gnarled mesquite, its branches clawing the sky like skeletal fingers, he slung his rifle over his shoulder and moved through the scrub, his boots silent on the cracked earth. The desert held its breath, the silence sacred, broken only by the wind's soft sigh carrying the scent of sand and creosote, a warning woven into the air. In a clearing ringed by boulders, Caleb stopped, his breath catching like a stone dropped into his well. There, bound to a towering saguaro cactus, was a young Apache woman, no older than 20, her wrists lashed with mesquite fiber rope. The cactus's spines, each 2 inches long, pierced her sun-darkened skin, drawing thin streams of blood that stained her tattered cotton dress. Her face, cheekbones carved like canyon walls, was framed by long black hair, falling like a curtain, matted with sweat and dust. Her eyes, dark as obsidian under a moonless sky, flickered with fear, yet burned with a defiance that struck Caleb like a spark in dry grass. Above her head, a crude wooden sign stabbed into the earth screamed in red paint, "The white shows no mercy." The words, scrawled by the border militia, a band led by Silas Iron Handstone, were a blade aimed at both Caleb and the woman, whose well was their true target, a prize worth killing for in this water-starved land. Caleb's throat tightened, bile rising like a bitter tide, his face hardening, the lines around his eyes deepening like canyons carved by years of guilt over Lily's unanswered cries. The wind returned, gusting harder, carrying the scent of distant smoke, as if the desert itself whispered of danger. Caleb's hand trembled, gripping his knife's handle, the blade that had earned him his name glinting like a silver vow. "Goddamn," he muttered, his voice hoarse as gravel, his jaw clenching as memories of Lily, her small hand slipping from his and the fire's chaos clawed at his heart. Her face, etched with pain, yet fierce as a hawk tethered by ropes, mirrored Lily's stubborn spark, and something stirred in Caleb, a river long dry, now rippling with purpose. The militia's sign was a threat, not just to her, but to his well, the lifeblood of his 200 acres, tying their fates together in this harsh land. He stepped forward, the wind brushing his face like a ghost's touch, and sliced the ropes, each cut a defiance of the militia's curse. Ayanna collapsed, light as a broken bird, and Caleb caught her, her body trembling in his arms. He grasped her hand, his calloused fingers wrapping around her bloodied ones, feeling the faint pulse of life beneath her skin. "Hold on, girl," he murmured, his voice soft as the desert dusk. "You're safe for now." Her eyes fluttered, frightened yet searching, like a blade drawn halfway, and Caleb, his face softening for the first time in years, touched her cheek, wiping away dust and blood with a gentleness that surprised him. "You got a name?" he asked, his tone low, like the wind sighing through the rafters of his house. She didn't answer, her lips parting only to breathe, but her fingers tightened on his coat, a silent plea. "Ayanna," he said. the name rising unbidden, like a memory of a river he'd seen in his scouting days, dry most days, but fierce after rain. Quiet, but strong. Suits you. Her eyes blinked once, slow, no protest, just breath. He draped his coat over her shoulders, the denim rough against her wounds, and lifted her onto Sage, cradling her against his chest as the wind softened, casting long shadows across the trail to his ranch. Caleb Longknife Holt, a rancher weathered by 40 years of sun and sorrow, trudged along a dusty trail, his boots grinding against the brittle ground of his 200-acre spread. His face, a rugged map etched by grief, bore deep lines around a strong jaw dusted with stubble, his eyes pale as winter sage, cutting through the haze, reflecting a heart that had turned to stone since the fire 5 years ago, when raiders white men, though the town whispered of Apache, reduced his wife, Claire, and 10-year-old daughter, Lily, to ashes. Once a border scout, Caleb earned his nickname from the 6-inch Bowie knife at his belt, its handle worn smooth by hands calloused from roping cattle and burying loss. His ranch house, a modest outpost of adobe and pine, stood a half-mile off, its roof of rusted tin, groaning like an old ballad, and patched walls, a testament to his stubborn endurance, holding 2 books, a tattered Bible, and a worn almanac on a shelf beside a faded quilt stitched by Clara, the only relics of a life burned away. The house, honest as the man himself, clung to the edge of his land, centered around a well that bubbled up from deep earth, a lifeline coveted by land barons who ruled these parts with greed as sharp as spurs. The house loomed ahead, its adobe walls scarred by time, its single room a refugee where Caleb had lived alone since the fire, the quilt on the cot a fading echo of Clara's hands, the shelf's books a silent prayer for redemption. The well, its waters shimmering like a vow carved in liquid silver, 100 yards off, stood as a beacon of hope and a target for greed. Caleb glanced at her, her head pressed to his chest, her breath like dry leaves skittering across stone, and his face lined like the cracked earth tightened with resolve. The malicious words burned in his mind, but he pushed them away, his heart stirring like a river after rain. This was choice, a step into a wilderness heavier than any he'd faced. If this tale of a scarred man and a defiant girl speaks to your soul, join us at Wild West Love Stories for more tales of love born in the desert's fire. The sun had sunk below the jagged ridges of West Texas, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and molten gold, as Caleb carried the woman into his humble ranch house, a weathered sanctuary of adobe and pine that stood defiant against the relentless summer of 1878, its tin roof catching the last glimmers of daylight like a weary sentinel. The house, a single room with a sagging loft, was as unyielding as the man who built it, its walls patched with clay and old sheet metal, scarred by 5 years of wind and memory since the fire that stole his wife and daughter. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of dust, leather, and the faint tang of mesquite smoke. The floorboards worn smooth by Caleb's solitary tread, a single lantern flickering on a rough-hewn table like a heartbeat struggling to hold steady. A lone shelf held 2 books, a tattered Bible, and a worn almanac, beside a bundle of dried sage and a faded quilt, stitched by his late wife, Clara, draped over a cot in the corner, its threads whispering of a life lost to ash. The house, modest yet honest, stood as a testament to Caleb's stubborn endurance, a man who had carved a home from the desert's cruelty, just as he had carved his survival from loss. Caleb, his face a map of sorrow etched by sun and grief, laid her gently on the cot, her body light as a desert wisp, her skin marred by the saguaro's spines, each wound a silent cry against the border militia's brutality. His features, weathered as the red rock cliffs beyond his 200-acre ranch, bore deep lines around his mouth, like canyons carved by years of silence, and his gray eyes, sharp as storm clouds, flickered with a quiet storm of guilt and resolve. His jaw, square and dusted with stubble, tightened as he studied her face, her dark eyes glinting like obsidian under a moonless sky, fierce yet clouded with fear, like a hawk tethered by unseen chains. Her long black hair, matted with sweat and blood, fell like a curtain over her face, and Caleb, his heart a barren plain stirred by a sudden gust, felt a pang, like a stone dropping into the still depths of his well, rippling with memories of his daughter, Lily, whose eyes had once held the same defiant spark. He moved with the deliberate grace of a man who had faced too many ambushes, gathering a tin basin, a clean cloth, and a jar of salve crafted from yucca root and chamomile, remedies learned from a Comanche trader in the days before his world burned. Kneeling beside the cot, he dipped the cloth into warm water, wringing it out with hands calloused from roping his 30 head of cattle and wielding his 6-inch Bowie knife, and began to clean her wounds, his touch reverent, as if washing away not just blood but the desert's curse. Her skin flinched, her breath catching like a thread snagged on a mesquite thorn, and Caleb paused, his eyes meeting hers, steady as the cliffs that guarded his land. "I ain't here to hurt you," he said, his voice a low rumble, like the creak of the windmill that stood 50 feet from the house, groaning under the weight of the desert's relentless wind. She said nothing, her lips sealed like a dry riverbed, but her fingers, trembling like sagebrush in a storm, clutched the quilt's edge, and Caleb, sensing the weight of her distress, retreated to a corner, tending a pot of beans over a small fire. The silence between them heavy as the guilt carried for failing Lily 5 years ago, her cries echoing like a coyote's wail across a canyon. Days bled into one another, each dawn igniting the desert in hues of fire and ash, and the woman remained a silent shadow, her posture tight as a coiled rattlesnake, her eyes tracking Caleb as he worked mending fences under the blistering sun, hauling water from the well that was the lifeblood above. His ranch, coveted by land barons and the border militia alike. She refused food, her hunger a quiet defiance, but Caleb left plates of cornbread and jerky on a stool, never pressing, his broad shoulders hunched as if bearing her pain alongside his own, his face lined like the cracked earth outside softening only when he thought she wasn't watching. One afternoon, as he repaired a fence post, a bead of sweat stinging a fresh cut on his hand, she emerged from the house, her bare feet tentative on the hot earth, like a river testing its banks after years of drought. She pointed to a patch of prickly pear near the well, its pads vibrant against the dust, and said, her voice dry as midsummer sand, "Crush that. It heals." Caleb's eyes, gray as a brewing storm, met hers, and he nodded, crouching to pluck the plant. As she handed him the pulp, their fingers brushed, a fleeting touch like the first raindrop on parched soil, and Caleb grasped her hand gently, his thumb tracing the rope burns on her wrist, a silent vow of protection. "Obliged," he murmured, and her gaze, sharp as a blade drawn halfway, softened, her lips parting as if to speak, but the words remained buried, like water hidden beneath the desert's crust. The fragile peace shattered when hoofbeats thundered across the horizon, a cloud of dust rising like a warning from the earth itself on the 7th day since Ayana's rescue. Word of a surviving Apache girl had reached Theban Captain Silas Iron Hand Stone, a man whose ironclad fist and hatred for Native Americans matched his greed for Caleb's well, the only reliable water source within 20 miles. 5 riders, their canvas coats stained with dust, descended on the ranch under the guise of security checks. Caleb, his face hardening like the red rock cliffs, ushered Ayana to a trapdoor beneath the floorboards, a relic from his scouting days. As she descended, her hand lingered in his, squeezing tightly, her eyes wide with fear but trusting, like a star piercing the night. "Stay low," he whispered, brushing his fingers against her cheek, a gesture as tender as it was urgent, before sealing the hatch. Outside, Silas dismounted, his voice sharp as a spur. "Heard you're harboring a fugitive, Holt," he sneered, eyes narrowing like a vulture circling carrion. Caleb stood on the porch, his 6-foot frame unyielding, his face a stoic mask, the lines around his eyes deepening like canyons under the weight of defiance. "Ain't nobody here but me and the ghosts," he said, his voice flat, a desert wind carrying no warmth. The men searched, kicking over barrels, threatening to torch the barn, but Caleb's gaze, cold as his blade, held them at bay. Silas spat into the dirt, his parting words of venomous promise. "We'll be back, long knife." No mercy. As the dust settled, Caleb lifted the trap door, and Ayanna emerged, her breath ragged. She reached for his hand, her fingers trembling but firm, and Caleb pulled her into a brief embrace, his arms a fortress against the gathering storm, the house's walls bearing witness to a trust as fragile and fierce as the desert itself. As the dust of the border militia's departure settled over the 200-acre ranch, the West Texas night unfurled its velvet cloak, the stars blinking into view like ghosts awakening from a restless slumber, their light casting faint shadows across the adobe and pine walls of Caleb's house, a modest outpost scarred by 5 years of wind and memory, its sagging tin roof creaking under the weight of a desert wind that whistled low through the rafters, whispering like a ghost remembering its name. Inside, the single room glowed faintly under the lantern's flicker, its flame dancing on the rough-hewn table beside a tattered Bible and a worn almanac, relics of a life Caleb had buried alongside his wife, Clara, and daughter, Lily, whose faded quilt draped the cot where Ayaya now sat, her posture no longer coiled like a rattlesnake, but softened like a river testing its banks after a long drought. Caleb, his face with its deep lines carving canyons around a strong jaw dusted with stubble, stood by the fire, his gray eyes, sharp as storm clouds, fixed on the embers as if searching for answers in their dying glow. Ayanna's face, no longer just fearful, but burning with a quiet fury that matched the wind's restless hum outside. The silence between them was heavy, not empty but charged, like the air before a thunderstorm. And Caleb felt it press against his chest, a weight as familiar as the guilt that haunted him since the fire that stole his family 5 years ago, their cries echoing like a coyote's wail across a canyon. Ayanna's fingers, still marked by rope burns, traced the quilt's faded threads, and she spoke at last, her voice dry as the riverbeds in midsummer, yet steady, like the pulse of the well 100 yards from the house. "My people, they died at a spring poisoned by men who called us thieves," she said, her words cutting through the silence like a knife through mesquite, each syllable carrying the pain of a massacre that left her clan broken, their bodies strewn across a canyon 20 miles north, marked by a sign. Scrawled in blood, the white shows no mercy. Her eyes, fierce as a hawk tethered by grief, met Caleb's, and he saw in them a storm trapped, a fury too big for her slender frame, her shoulders trembling like sagebrush in a gust. Caleb's throat tightened, bile rising like a bitter tide, his face hardening, the lines around his eyes deepening like the cracked earth outside, as memories of Lily, her small hand slipping from his in the chaos of flames, clawed at his heart. He stepped closer, the floorboards creaking under his boots, and sat across from her, the lantern casting shadows that danced like mourners on the adobe walls. "I lost my own," he said, his voice a low rumble, like thunder on the horizon. "Clara, my wife, and Lily, my girl, 10 years old, burned by raiders, not your people, but men like those who hunt you." The confession, unspoken for years, spilled out like water from his well, raw and unfiltered, and his eyes, gray as the cliffs beyond his ranch, glistened with a pain he'd buried under silence. Ayanna's gaze softened, her lips parting as if to speak. But instead she reached out, her hand trembling like mesquite leaves, and placed it on his, her fingers cool against his calloused skin, a touch that sent a shiver through him, like the first raindrop on parched soil. Caleb squeezed her hand gently, his thumb tracing the scars on her wrist, a silent vow that their pain, though different in tongue and blood, was one. The wind sighed outside, brushing through the sagebrush like whispers of the past, and Caleb, his face softening for the first time since the fire, leaned forward, brushing his fingers against her cheek, wiping away a tear she hadn't shed, his touch as deader as the desert dusk. "We ain't so different, you and me," he murmured, his voice a river running deep. And Ayanna, her eyes no longer a blade drawn halfway but open, vulnerable, nodded, her breath warm against his hand. In that moment, under the lantern's glow, the house, its walls patched with clay, its quilt a fading echo of Clara's love, became a sanctuary, not just for Caleb's solitude, but for a bond forged in shared loss, as fragile and fierce as the well that sustained them. Days turned into nights, each dawn igniting the desert in hues of fire and ash, and Ayanna, no longer a silent shadow, began to teach Caleb the ways of her people, her voice steady as she showed him how to read the wind's direction, the tracks of a jackrabbit, or the hidden springs beneath the earth, knowledge born from a life woven into the desert's pulse. Caleb, his broad shoulders less hunched, his face less a mask of stone, taught her in return, guiding her hands on his rifle, its barrel gleaming under the sun, and showing her how to aim with the precision of a scout who'd survived 15 years on the border. One afternoon, as Ayanna fired a shot that struck a tin can 50 yards off, she turned, her face alight with a smile, small but radiant, like a star piercing the night. Caleb, his heart stirring like a river after rain, grasped her hand, pulling her close, and wrapped her in a brief embrace, his arms a fortress against the world's cruelty. "You're a natural," he said, his voice warm as the embers in his hearth, and Ayanna, her cheek pressed to his chest, let out a soft laugh, her breath like dry leaves skittering across stone. Their partnership grew, a dance of survival and trust, as they moved through the ranch, Caleb showing her how to mend a fence with wire and sweat, Ayanna pointing out plants that healed or poisoned, their hands brushing in the work, each touch a thread weaving them closer. One evening, under a sky heavy with stars, they sat by the well, a pulse of life defying the desert's thirst, and Ayanna leaned against his shoulder, her hair falling like a curtain over his arm, the wind softening as if to cradle their moment. Caleb kissed her forehead, a gesture as gentle as the breeze, and whispered, "We'll face what's coming together." The desert watched, its silence a prayer, as two scarred souls became allies, their bond a flame flickering against the gathering storm of Silas Iron Handstone's return, a threat as certain as the dust carried on the wind. The dawn broke with a vengeance, the sun igniting the horizon in a blaze of crimson and gold, casting long shadows across Caleb's 200-acre ranch, where the adobe and pine house, its sagging tin roof scarred by 5 years of relentless wind, stood as a weary sentinel, its sin room holding a tattered Bible, a worn almanac, and a faded quilt stitched by Clara, relics of a life now woven into the fragile bond between Caleb and Ayanna, who stood side by side, their silhouettes framed against the WWL, 100 yards off, its water glinting like a promise under the rising light. Caleb's face, a rugged map etched by 40 years of sorrow, bore deep lines like canyons around a strong jaw dusted with stubble, his gray eyes sharp as storm clouds, flickering with a resolve as unyielding as the red rock cliffs beyond. Ayanna, her face etched with high cheekbones, sharp as ridgelines, lips cracked but full, her dark eyes burning like obsidian under a moonless sky, stood with a posture fierce yet graceful, like a hawk poised for flight, her long black hair swaying in the wind that returned, gusting harder than usual, carrying the scent of sand and distant smoke, a whisper of the storm to come. The air grew heavy, charged with the weight of an unspoken threat, as Ayana, her senses honed by Apache teachings, spotted faint tracks near the well-shallow scratches in the earth, laced with a bitter chemical tang, the hallmark of the border militia's poison, a tactic used to choke the life from small ranches like Caleb's, forcing owners to flee or perish. Her breath caught, like a thread snagged on a mesquite thorn, and she grasped Caleb's hand, her fingers trembling but firm, her eyes locking onto his with a fire that spoke of survival. "They're coming," she whispered, her voice dry as the riverbeds in midsummer, and Caleb, his face hardening, the lines around his eyes deepening like the cracked earth, nodded, his thumb tracing the rope burns on her wrist, a silent vow that the well their lifeline would not fall. The wind sighed, brushing through the sagebrush like whispers of ghosts, remembering their names, and Caleb, his heart a barren plain now stirred by Ayana's presence, pulled her close, his lips brushing her forehead in a fleeting kiss, as tender as the desert dusk, sealing their pact to face the coming storm together. They prepared with the urgency of those who knew time was a thief, Ayana mapping the terrain with her knowledge of hidden paths, her movements swift as a shadow slipping through the mesquite groves, while Caleb, his 6-inch Bowie knife gleaming at his belt, checked his rifle and revolver. He, hands steady as the cliffs that guarded his land. The ranch house, its adobe walls patched with clay, its quilt a fading echo of Clara's love, stood as a silent witness to their resolve, its single room a sanctuary now charged with purpose. By noon, the horizon darkened with dust, a cloud rising like a warning from the earth itself, and the thunder of hoofbeats 10 riders strong heralded the arrival of thieving Captain Silas Iron Handstone, his iron-clad fist glinting under his glove, his eyes narrow as a vulture circling carrion, leading the border militia in a raid to claim the well and erase the defiance of a lone rancher and an Apache girl. The battle erupted with the ferocity of a summer storm, the desert trembling under the crack of gunfire and the shouts of men as Ayana, using her Apache guile, led 3 riders into a narrow gulch 200 yards west, where she vanished into the shadows of boulders, her movements silent as the wind that softened to a hush, luring them into a trap where she struck with a borrowed knife, her face fierce with the fury of her lost clan. Caleb, his face a stoic mask, the lines around his eyes like canyons carved by grief, stood by the well, his rifle spitting fire, dropping 2 men before they could reach the water, his bullets as precise as the scout he'd been for 15 years. The militia pressed harder, their torches threatening to set the barn ablaze, its 30 head of cattle lowing in panic. But Caleb, his gray eyes blazing, held the line, his revolver a thunderclap in the chaos. Silas, his voice sharp as a spur, charged through the dust, his iron fist raised, and Caleb met him in a clearing by the well, their clash a dance of steel and rage, the Bowie knife flashing like lightning against Silas's saber. Caleb, his face etched with resolve, fought with the ferocity of a man defending not just water, but a future, his blade slicing through Silas's defenses, drawing blood that stained the earth red as the militia's sign. A saber cut grazed Caleb's side, and he stumbled, blood soaking his shirt. But Ayana, emerging from the gulch, her face alight with terror and defiance, rushed to his side, grasping his hand to steady him. Her breath ragged as she screamed, "Stay with me." Caleb, his vision blurring, pulled her into a fierce embrace, his arms a fortress against the world's cruelty, and with a final thrust, drove his knife into Silas's chest, the militia leader collapsing like a felled mesquite, his iron fist still as the desert fell silent. The remaining riders fled, their hoofbeats fading into the wind that returned, gusting harder, carrying the scent of blood and smoke, as Ayana, her hands trembling like sagebrush in a storm, tore strips from her dress to bind Caleb's wound, her fingers deft as she applied yucca salve, her eyes locked on his, fierce yet tender, like a river finding its course. Caleb, his face pale but resolute, touched her cheek, his calloused fingers tracing her jaw, and whispered, "You're my reason now," his voice a rumble like thunder fading into dusk. Beneath the moon, Caleb, his face a weathered ledger, each wrinkle a tally of loss of 40 years' sorrow, lines carved like canyons around a stubbled jaw, slid his coarse, sun-scorched fingers through Ayanya's raven-black hair, each strand a silken whisper against his callous touch, like dirt. Stone meeting a fleeting stream. Their breaths, hot and ragged, collided like storm winds, carrying the ache of shared scars, his for Clara and Lily, hers for her slaughtered clan. His lips, rough with stubble, met hers, soft and yielding, in a deep, fervent kiss, their tongues entwining with primal hunger, a dance of strength and tenderness that burned through the scars of their pasts. Ayana, delicate yet resilient, pressed against him, her supple form a desert vine curling around his weathered iron-hard frame, her curves molding to his unyielding strength, nails biting into his blood-stained shirt, as if to meld their pain into one. Their heartbeats thundered, a shared pulse of anguish and desire, each throb a cry from hearts torn by grief, now melting into a searing, sweet unity. His rugged hands, forged by years of toil, cradled her face with a gentleness that belied their hardness, while her lips, sweet as sagebrush blooming after rain, tasted of salt and survival, carrying unspoken vows. This deepened, a slow, sensual tide, tongues exploring with a tenderness that unfurled like dawn over the Siam Sea, washing away the bitterness of their wounds. Ayana's eyes, obsidian stars glinting with unshed tears, locked onto Caleb's storm-gray gaze, her body entwining his like a vine claiming a weathered oak, soft yet tenacious against his enduring hardness. Her breath hitched, warm against his jaw, as sweetness spread, a fragile promise, rising from the ashes of their past, kindling a fire between two souls. By the well, under the wind's soft sigh whispering through mesquite like ghosts, remembering their names, their kiss a vow of raw, unbreakable love blossomed, eternal as the desert's heart, binding their broken hearts in a reborn Siam Sea, where pain dissolved into a flame of hope, fierce and everlasting. The ranch house, its walls scarred but standing, watched as they sat by the well, Ayana leaning against his shoulder, her hair falling like a curtain over his arm, the water glinting like a vow unbroken. The desert, its silence a prayer, bore witness to their victory, the well a symbol of life and love, as two scarred souls, bound by blood and fire, faced a horizon where the wind whispered not of loss but of hope, a promise as enduring as the cliffs that cradled their land. The dawn broke like a lover's sigh, its amber light spilling over the saw-toothed mesas, bathing Caleb's 200-acre ranch in a glow tender as a whispered secret, where the earth, bruised from the border militia's rampage, lay hushed, its scars kissed by a breeze that wove through brittle. Kala, carrying the scent of scorched leather and blooming ocotillo, a hymn to life persisting in the wake of chaos. The well, steadfast, at the land's heart, pulsed with water clear as a prophet's dream, its ripples a quiet testament to endurance, standing resolute amid the wreckage of splintered saddles and spent shells, where Caleb Long Knife Holt, his 40 years etched in sinew and resolve, leaned against a gnarled fence post, his chest swathed in bandages from Ayana's deft hands, the pain in his side a fading pulse, his eyes gray as ash after a wildfire, scanning the horizon with a scout's vigilance, their depths alight with a warmth new as the morning. Ayana, her form lithe as a pronghorn gliding through sage, knelt beside him, her skin kissed by the sun's first caress, her full lips parted in a breath heavy with survival, her eyes dark as a canyon's heart at midnight, blazing with an unbroken spirit, her hands, scarred yet steady, clutching. Desert lavender, its fragrance a prayer, rising from the dust. Her presence a melody threading through the desert's silence, harmonizing with the wind's low chant. The land, its breath a murmur through thorny branches, seemed to kneel to their resilience, the air thick with the promise of rebirth, like a seed stirring beneath cracked clay. And Caleb, his shoulders broad as the mesas guarding their valley, reached for Ayanna's wrist, his fingers rough as sandstone, brushing her faded scars with a reverence that spoke of battles shared, their touch a bridge across the chasm of their pasts, where loss had once ruled like a merciless sun. Her pulse, quick as a jackrabbit's bound, thrummed beneath his thumb, and she leaned closer, her body a slender arc against his weathered frame, her warmth a spark igniting the cold hollow of his chest, where grief for Clara and Lily lingered, now softened by a love fierce as the desert's pulse. Their breaths, hot and ragged, collided like storm winds, carrying the ache of shared scars, and Caleb's lips, rough with stubble, met hers, soft and yielding, in a deep, fervent kiss, their tongues entwining with primal hunger, a dance of strength and tenderness that burned through their wounds. Her nails biting into his blood-stained shirt, as if to meld their pain into one, her curves molding to his iron-hard frame, like a desert vine curling around stone, sweet as sagebrush blooming after rain. Her eyes, obsidian stars glistening with unshed tears, locked onto his storm-gray gaze, her breath hitching, warm against his jaw, as their kiss deepened, a slow, sensual tide washing away bitterness, kindling a fire between two souls, eternal as the desert's heart. "We're still here," Ayanna whispered, her voice a melody soft as riverbeds blooming after rain, and Caleb, his jaw tight with a scout's stubborn resolve, nodded, his eyes glistening like dew on sage, a vulnerability piercing the stone of his heart, as if the desert wept for their survival, its tears cooling in the well that stood as their sanctuary, a lifeline wrested from greed's iron grasp. They rose, their steps a quiet waltz across the earth, the ranch a canvas of scars and hope, its fences splintered but mendable, its barn a sentinel of charred beams holding fast, where Caleb's 30 cattle lowed in a chorus of defiance, a borderland custom of clinging to life where water was. Wealth and trust, a rare coin. Ayanna, swift as a shadow slipping through dusk, gathered stones to shore up the corral, her hands deft as a weaver bird's, each stone a prayer for stability, her Apache wisdom reading stars, like scripture guiding her to hidden springs, her spirit a flame dancing in the wind, unquenched by her clan's loss. Caleb, his strength returning like a stream after drought, hauled beams to rebuild the shed, his muscles taut beneath a sweat-soaked shirt, his brow furrowed with a scout's focus, his bowie knife sharp from felling Silas tucked at his hip, a silent guardian, his heart no longer a fortress, but a hearth warmed by Ayanna's presence, her resilience mirroring his own. Months wove into seasons, each sunset painting the desert in strokes of amber and rose, and the ranch, once a lone outpost, blossomed with quiet vitality, the well's water feeding a patch of maize and beans Ayanna planted, their green shoots a rebellion against arid soil, a practice of borderland. Folk coaxing harvests from dust, their roots drinking deep from the well. Ask. Ayanna, her form softened by the gentle swell of new life beneath her cotton dress, wove willow baskets, her fingers nimble as a weaver's, her Apache songs soft as moonlight on water, filling the evenings, tales of her people's courage etched in the stars. Caleb, his hands calloused but gentle, carved a cedar rattle for their coming child, his touch precise as a scout's aim, his eyes, once clouded by grief, bright as dawn over the mesas, his love a steady fire, like the lantern glowing in their home, casting shadows dancing like spirits of their union. One twilight, Under a sky blazing with stars like scattered promises, they stood by the well, its water a mirror of their dreams. And Ayanna, her hand on her womb, whispered, "Our child will run free like the wind over the dunes." Caleb, his face softened by a smile rare as rain, drew her close, his lips grazing her temple, a kiss light as a feather in the breeze, his rugged hands cradling her face, their bodies entwined like roots of a single tree, their love a song sung in the desert silence as enduring as the granite cliffs guarding their valley. Their legend, whispered in borderland cantinas, told of two souls who defied hate's curse, their well a fountain of hope in a land of greed, their bond a testament to love's triumph, etched in dust and stars, a hallelujah rising from the desert's heart, eternal as the land.